Here's a quick look into today's episode.
Throughout command, what we don't recognize, I think, do enough is thank our families. I got to pour my heart and soul into this organization as a battalion commander. And the person who really, that effort, that energy that I didn't get to invest in was my family. Most people, you do it phenomenally well. And I just can't, I wasn't that type of person. And I just haven't made that leap yet. When I invested in that organization, I did. The person that really suffered, if you will, or who didn't get my time was my family for this past 2 years. So I got to reinvest in that this past year. That's what I'm looking forward to. But and that's just not my family. That's every family and every formation in the Army. Thank you for supporting their loved ones and soldiers, because they have to be seen here. They are the ones that help soldiers at home, and they're the quiet heroes, if you will, that they don't get enough recognition, in my opinion. And so I'll give my last word to them. So thank you to Sarah for, again, encouraging me to do this, because I was hesitant about doing it. She's like, no, you got to do it. And I said, okay, you're right. I got to do it, because I tried. It matters. And I'm excited for the next year. How do I translate all those tactical operational elements and share that with the joint community to make sure that our equities are either present or at least accounted for. And that's where I think I invested a lot of my time these past 2 years. Is if people had a war council, my top 5. Mentoring, coaching, that was my team, when that's the climate I wanted. And I let them run with it. Run with it until you guys can't, then I'll take the risk. Just let me know what those risks are. And when I was the 3-5 at Corps, I heard General Brunson say a great thing. He said, hey, there's no decisions that you guys can make that I can't undo. Right? And I just took that and I said, hey, there's no decision, make decisions on my behalf. Here's my intent. Here's my left and right parameters. Here's what I'm willing to do. Make decisions along the way, those micro decisions, because I didn't want people to wait on me or the organization.
Welcome to another episode of Teach Me to Fish, where our purpose is to help leaders better understand what drives people. In today's world, the core of recruiting and retaining talent revolves around leadership. And not just average leadership, but motivated, values-based, inspirational leadership. Our purpose is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories and stacking habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people.
Eric Rodriguez and I, we were betting. We were like, hey, one of us is going to go on not even yours, on a podcast in the future. Which one is it?
Yes.
And he's going to be like, it's going to be you first.
You're going to be the first one.
And I told him our bet was, because we were listening to Sergeant Major Curry and we were all at LTP. It was like,
you were all there sitting there at the
same time? We were all
time?
sitting in LTP at JRTC, just listening to Sergeant Major Curry. It was one right before him. I think Donnie Caslow was on right afterwards. So we were going through.
Oh, those were two of my favorite ones to do, because when I was doing those, it just felt so I was so comfortable. I was talking to people that I know. That's one of the things I've been doing is I've been doing most of these episodes with people that I know. Yes, I've got a lot of people that I've asked to either be a part of, or they say, hey, you should have this person on. But I'm sticking for the first 100 or so is that I want to stick with people that I know. Number one, because it's the easiest to kind of bring them in, get them comfortable. Two, you're comfortable with me because we know each other, right? Yep. And I don't have to spend time getting you comfortable. We know what we wanted to talk about. We've been talking about this for a while.
Yeah.
That's why I was super excited about doing it. I also try to time it up right about at the right moment.
Yes, sir.
So tell us a little bit, what's going on in your life, right now?
So right now, I'm PCSing. So just came out of command and getting ready to go to Fort McNair, Washington, D.C. And so a lot of things going on in my mind, trying to clear housing, clear posts, get the family set up. So a lot of stress, just like normal families, families go through just about this time of the year. And so I'm trying to make sure that I'm not missing anything on my way out. So it's been.
What's at Fort McNair? What are you going to be doing there?
So I'm going to be at the National Defense University. So a small college there, College of International Security Affairs. So it'll be a war college for a year.
Oh, man. Well, hey, so now you've come out of command, right? It's been 2 weeks. I know there's a world. It's hard to even think about these things because you're packing your house, you're moving, you're getting ready to get your family. There's probably a million things that are kind of going through your mind. What is the biggest thing that's been going through your mind over the last couple of weeks?
Oh, I think right now it's mostly, I think, just what we just talked about. It's really just making sure that I don't miss anything.
Yeah.
With especially setting up the family, because just came back from the Philippines for 3 months, was all in and trying making sure the transition went well with the guy coming in and with Sean Stroh, and now I just have to pivot to make sure now the family things that I've been woefully neglecting, as Sarah would tell me. So now I'm trying to shore up those and making sure that all the PCS and the things that I have to do to get out, make sure those are done.
Yeah, needless to say, it's like a short flash to bang.
Yes, about 3 weeks after since I swapped guidons, and now I got to make sure I get on a plane and make sure I'm not missing anything.
Yeah, no doubt. And so there's not a ton of time to reflect yet, and it's still kind of probably like still starting to register. Like you're not a commander anymore.
Yeah. So I said in my change of command speech, and I do believe it. It's that we're not tied to the call sign stays, Gimlet 6 stays, and I made sure, I think at least the past year, I was deliberate about that. It's like, and Colin Powell said the same thing. His things. Hey, don't make sure that your ego is tied to that position.
Right.
So when it falls, you don't fall with it. And I just made sure it was about the organization. General Williams taught me that when I was a brigade XO. He said that to when you're a battalion commander. He said that to every commander. And I remember hearing that. It's like, hey, it's not about you. It's about the unit. It's about the organization. And that was always in the forefront of my mind as a commander. And even as I left, it's about the unit. It's not about me. So I did have time to reflect, but probably not, to collect all the thoughts and probably put it in a coherent way.
Yeah. But I think that when you're doing it right, you're reflecting since the day you took command. So like you were like thinking about these kind of things the whole time you were in command. You're making the most of every single day, the way you kind of live your life, the way you kind of train, right? So when it's time to change command, you don't look back on like I get that feeling of like a deployment, right? Where you're like, there are things that you wish you could have done different. There's things you wish you would have done better, but it's time to go home, right? It was the deployment was over, right? But you didn't lose your identity when you went home, right? You have a whole nother thing to go back to, right?
That's right.
And so I felt a similar way. And so I said, I'm going to treat command the same way. I'm sitting here right now with my rattlesnake shirt on, like the same t-shirt I've had for the years. And that hasn't gone away just because we did change of command, right?
Right. No, absolutely, sir.
Yeah. So, the things that we're going to talk about today, like I really want to get to like what's on your mind coming out of battalion command, and like what are some of the things that are still fresh, that being in command for the last 2 years, and share that with a lot of people. It's change of command season, right? So there's a lot of people that are just going into command. There's people that just found out they're going to take command next year. And then there's people coming out of command, and everybody's, got a different way of kind of handling or dealing with coming out of command or getting ready to prepare for command, right? So it's a combination of all those things. And I've been spending a lot of time talking with people over the last few weeks, about those things, the last few months, actually, so that becomes like the kind of the meat and potatoes about what what I want to talk about today. But like, before we kind of do any of that stuff, like people want to know, like, who you are, why you joined the Army in the first place, and like how you grew up, in the Army. So like, why did you join the Army in the first place?
Yeah, I appreciate that comment or question, sir. So I'm an Army brat. My dad joined the Army in Korea, coming out of Korea. He was a ROK Katusa, worked with the American Army, loved doing what the Americans were doing, immigrated, joined the Army, came back. So born and grew up there, came back in. I love seeing and being part of the Army. So I've been part of the Army ever since I was born.
Yeah.
And I knew in some way, in some fashion, I wanted to serve. One, because, I think my dad said it. He's like, hey, this country's done a lot for our family. And, you have to be, he's grateful for, what he's provided for us. And I took that to heart as a high school kid. And I wanted to join and serve and do my part. It was a great way to pay for college. And I knew one way or another, I knew I was going to join the Army somehow, some fashion. So, after high school, I told myself I wanted to join the Army. I wanted to go into the medical service corps and really just be a doctor. So in college, I was a paramedic. And so I was, that's how I paid for school partially. And I knew I needed to get hours in. And, sessions came around and they said, hey, you're going to be an infantry officer. And I said, okay, well, that's a shock because I thought I wanted to be a medical service corps officer. So, okay, I'm going to be an infantry officer. So I had to go and prepare for that. And that was, in a way, I was like, okay, this is like 180 of what I thought I was going to do for the Army. So I was like, okay, I'll just do 4 years and come back out.
What school were you at?
At University of Texas Health Science Center.
Okay.
So, and I've heard a couple of your previous podcasts with the ROTC commander and other people. Yeah. And I did. In my ROTC program, we had Dan Dillo was my PMS and Sergeant Major Kenny Lee. I mean, those are the two most impactful, as a cadet. You talk about lifetime ago. That was almost 21 years ago. Right. Of that, those two gentlemen, they've had such a huge impact on me. And if they're hearing now, I still can't thank them enough. But, they've set me up of how to be a good officer, not just from an senior officer perspective, but from a sergeant major and, a senior NCO perspective. So those perspectives, set me up for success. And, they told me, it's like, hey, it's, you'll be fine. Just, grow where you're planted.
Did you get contracted in your junior year?
I did.
So your first 2 years you had to pay for to go to school.
Yep.
And was your school a satellite of a major program?
Yes, it was.
Yeah. So they were across town, like, right? Probably how many, 45 minutes or something like that away from your school?
Yes. Yeah.
The satellite programs, it's a lot different than being at a host where you see your PMSs, you see your APMSs, a little bit bigger facilities, right?
Yep.
And did you have to travel across town to kind of do the labs and stuff like that?
About 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Yep.
What a different experience.
It is. And it was a great formative years. And then, flash forward, had to go to Bullock 2 back then. Yeah. It was a provisional program. So I went to Oklahoma, to Fort Sill. I remember having that conversation with my branch manager at the time. I was like, why am I going to Fort Sill?
So that's where you went for your first portion?
For Bullock 2 back then.
And then you came to Fort Benning.
Fort Benning.
And then you did the infantry officer.
Yes, sir. Yep. And
second part.
Yep. Second part was, I think they just changed it from IOBC to iBullock back then. So
what year was this?
2006, 2007.
Okay.
So it was just coming around. And so just came back around. The daunting thing was Ranger School. Yeah. So I had to get ready for Ranger School. And I just remember
coming out of Bullock.
Yeah. And so that, I'm glad I did it. Prepped myself, recycled twice, but, got through it. That showed me grit, showed me about myself. And definitely.
Which phases did you recycle?
Mountain and Florida.
Yeah, me too.
It was the Overhang Club was probably the best place to hang out. I think there was a BRC. No, it was I think summer block leave that was going on. So I hung up there for about a couple of weeks, and then got to do Florida again. So that was a great time to re-blue. I do remember graduating though. One thing that stuck with me on Ranger School. This stuck with me for a while, and I'm sure they say it a lot. It's like, hey, when you graduate, in your tab, like you don't earn it by yourself. Everyone else around there earns it for you. Like it's a team effort,
no doubt.
And it's not you put in the individual effort initially, and every day you have to show up, but it's everyone around you who helps get you that tab. And I was like, yeah, that set I think the tone about everything being a team effort in the Army and being a team sport. Right?
Yeah, because that was one of the first things that you did, right? Like that's the first school that you did.
Yes, sir.
Was Ranger School.
Yep. And that was, I'm sorry, Air Assault School was the first. And then
as a cadet?
As a cadet. Okay. And then I went into Ranger School afterwards. So flash forward, went to my first unit out of JBLM at Fort Lewis, out of 2-1. And matter of fact, Sergeant Major Josh Yost, who's here now, he was my platoon sergeant.
When you were second lieutenant?
When I was, lieutenant. And then we actually got linked up in our deployment in 2009. Unfortunately, his first platoon leader, Dave Wright, was killed in action, and I was on the staff at the time. And then I got brought down to replace that lieutenant, who I know, like Dave Wright, because we all did the work up together in that unit, and we got moved up. And Dave Wright was killed on a RIP, on a relief in place. And so, talk about transition, a hard time transition coming in as a platoon leader, having to come in, and here's this platoon who just went through a rough patch for obvious reasons. And then I had to step in. So Dave, knowing Dave and Dave Wright, that was sad. And then taking over for him that way, that one in itself was a very hard transition. Because when you get ready to be a platoon leader in any position, that's probably the worst way you think about coming in. There's no way to prepare yourself for that, especially during those years. But talk about phenomenal NCOs in that platoon who, brought me in. And I remember Josh, he was like, hey, this is our platoon leader now. Let's support him. And I had a phenomenal company commander at the time, Casey Thoreen, who was my company commander. And he said, hey, just, they need you now. I need you to go out there and be their platoon leader. And it was a great deployment. It was a tough deployment, and we bonded, like Josh Yost of the world, Jimmy Cross, Dan Rabideau. And those are my guys who, my formative years as a lieutenant, who showed me the ropes of what good NCOs and great NCOs can do for their officers. And, they didn't make me feel like an outsider. Fortunately, I was part of the battalion already for about a couple of years there. So it was, it was a transition, and I knew the organization, but I didn't get to know that platoon. That whole year was a good time to just get to know that unit, and it stuck with me for these past 20 years.
Yeah, I think it's worth kind of pausing for a second to think about that, because when people ask, like, how did you get to where you are right now, or why are you making something important when you're a battalion commander, and most people have probably never heard that story, right?
No.
And know how you became a platoon leader, right? So thinking about that for a second, how did you became a platoon leader? That is so different than anybody I've ever had on the podcast, and most of the people that I've ever served with. Like, I can't rattle off 2 or 3 people who became a platoon leader because the platoon leader before them was killed. The closest thing I went through was when Matt Basic got wounded in Fallujah, and our XO had to take over as the platoon leader for a month before he could recover and come back. Mike Phillips did, because he was wounded. He had so much shrapnel in it, and he had to take about a month off. But we didn't have a stock of lieutenants in the 3 shop that were going to come down and take over for Matt. Yeah. Mike did as the XO. He went and led that platoon for about a month in Fallujah. And similarly, when the first person I ever knew that died in combat, when he was killed, Sergeant Johnson, like, we came home from that mission that day, and they were like, well, his gear was on the ground, and they said, well, he didn't make it. What do you mean he didn't make it? Yeah. Like, he died. And it was reality had hit so fast that he was gone. And then the next, like an hour later, the chaplain was with our platoons. And what he said was, we're going to grieve today, but tomorrow we got to get back on the horse.
Yep.
And I'm going to go out with you guys. And he's like, we're going to go out together. Dan Knight, Chaplain Dan Knight, he said, I'm going to go out there with you guys. Like, he was right. We have to get back on the horse. Like that's what I never had to do that in training, for real.
Yes, sir.
Like that. And so, like, your experience of becoming a platoon leader, I'm sure that's driving the leader that you've become as a company commander and as a field grade and now as battalion
Absolutely. Commander. Yeah, it's funny you say that, because, again, my company commander at the time, he was giving an interview. I think it was don't hold me to it. It was one of the interview. It was a big Post newspaper that came out with us in Afghanistan. And he was, he said it, and again, stuck with me. He's like, hey, IED fields out here, everyone gets blown up. I think everyone got blown up at least once at that point, except for my S3 at the time, Barry Carlson, we called it. He had a lucky striker. But, he said, hey, you just can't be fatalistic. You have to, if you stop and think about that, then you can't do your job, especially as an infantryman. If you think about, the next thing you're going out the wire and you're going to get hit and you're going to die, and then you're going to get frozen. And some of that, I think about that a lot. It's like, does training kick in? And for me, it absolutely did. First,
only if you did the training correctly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And good training, we talk about it now. We talk about as battalion commanders. You talk about JPMRC. Our old bosses talk about it. If you want to take care of soldiers, those are the type of training, those are unexpected things that will happen when, you're in a 2-way firing range, and are your guys prepared for it? And so that has been on the forefront of my mind. When you had your chaplain come out, we had a guy named Ben Sclaver. He was Captain Sclaver at the time. He was a CA officer who was attached to us. He came out with us in the same way. Our guys were shell shocked a little bit, rightfully so. And when we came out, our company commander came out, he came out, and unfortunately Ben went out on a patrol, and he was killed by a suicide bomber. Talk about a deployment where, you had these formidable figures in your company, in your organization, who everyone gravitated toward to. And then, 1 minute they're there and 1 minute they're not. I think for me, what stuck with me and for till now was, I had to become the SCOMO for his stuff because we were on a small COP. And for those who don't know, like when someone passes away or dies, there's normally a person who gets designated as the person who has to collect all their belongings, so they can, ship it, inventory it, and ship it back to their family members. So, I got tagged to be Ben's SCOMO as a platoon leader. I was going through his stuff and talk about the emotional, baggage. Not even baggage, but just the emotion that comes over it when you see your friend's stuff that you have to put it belong in. I told myself I'd make it a point when I get back home that I go see his family, his folks, and go see his gravesite. He's from Connecticut. I went to go see his fiance at the time, who I try to keep in contact with all these years. And, it's something I'll probably go back and do. But, I did that, kept that promise. There was one thing I kept, and I gave back to the Sklavers when I got back from Triple C. So anyway, fast forward. And that was my platoon leader years. Went back to Triple C out of Fort Benning. And then I get assigned to 4th Brigade, 4th ID out of Fort Carson. And talk about an intimidating place. At the time, Colonel Mingus was the brigade commander. My battalion commander was Scott Green. And I had great field grades. One of them, General Borwell now, and Colonel Pangelina, who I just got done talking to yesterday. And I was just surrounded by phenomenal, talent, Eric Normans of the world. And so we were just this tight-knit group of officers and NCOs, Red Warriors there in 112. And it was a 2-year, I think it was a year train up, close to 2 years. And we went back to Afghanistan, and I had the opportunity to go to Kunar this time with the battalion. And, for an infantryman, the RC East was probably, if there is such a thing, a best place where an infantryman can, practice their talent.
Where exactly in the Kunar?
We were up in southern Nuristan. So Asmar was Cop Monte, where I was at, and then Fob Bostic, where was our battalion headquarters. So that deployment, I got to be a company commander, Bravo Company 112, got my own COP. So, you talk about the responsibility that's given to company commanders at such, relative young age. And I remember that, again, coming back to being a battalion commander. And I have a picture, and I used to have a picture in my office. It was, I had my own 120 mortar section, a 105 DS platoon. And I just remember reflecting back on that time, and now company commanders now, it's like, hey, I had all this responsibility. Yeah. I had 3 districts, a small COP with 160 people, right? My own artillery platoon, and that was it. That was a company commander. And then the whole SFAB brigades came through. So I had 3 SFAB teams on my COP. And as a company commander, I had to take intent what my boss at the time, Scott Green, asked, and Colonel Mingus at the time said, hey, this is what we're doing. We're getting ready for the big transition. So we need you to make sure that 1, do your job, 2, keep everyone safe so that, we're transitioning correctly, and 3, get after it, So make sure that we don't stay set and become a target, because as you know, in Kunar, it's just a big bull where you're fighting. Yeah.
All the things that you just kind of went through very quickly, right? And you said the artillery, the mortars, the force protection of owning that COP, the responsibility of it, the people from other units that were going to kind of stay on your COP. Logistically, you're going to have to support everybody that's out there. There's so much that you kind of just went, okay, right? How much of that did you learn going through, on the deployment you learned while you were out there, versus how much of it do you think you learned maybe in the train ups?
Oh, I think they're about equal parts, sir. Some of it, you just have to, you got to live through it. You got to live through it. And, there's I think nothing can replicate. Some of it is just going through the pain of learning, like when you have to do it. Because if not, then you're not going to get it, and it's going to create more pain for you and your guys really as a company commander.
Right.
But a lot of it was, we did do a lot of the train up And fortunately, that brigade, 4th Brigade, 4th ID, was there prior to, when Cop Keating, it was Colonel at that time, Colonel George, ran General George's brigade that went through. So the battalion, 112, 212, 361 Cav, and the BSB, they all knew the area. And those veterans there, when they were doing the train up again, they were able to bring that experience back and say, hey, this is what's going to hurt. This is what we need to train on when we get back into, back into the valley. So a lot of that resident knowledge was passed on during the train up, and it was great.
Can you remember what was the biggest things that they said, we have to get this right during the train up in order to be ready?
I think the big thing back then was JFO, because a lot of it was making sure that we understood how to integrate JTACs, our fires, because some of the places that we were receiving direct or indirect contact, we couldn't reach with our direct fire weapon systems. Hence why you had to understand, you as a company commander and the ground force commander had to understand enablers.
Yeah.
And then I distinctly remember hey, the terrain, it's like going back to mountains, right? Ranger school again. It's like, hey, the terrain is probably your worst enemy outside the enemy itself.
Right.
So you have to be able to be physically fit to climb those mountains, stay out there. And I remember just looking at this one mountain up top, and I was like, man, that's a hell of a climb. And Operation Long Walk was one of them.
Yeah.
We had to climb from our cop so that there was this ridge line that the enemy just kept shooting at us. So we had to go clear it. And you had to be physically fit to carry all your stuff, get up there and be able to get to the fight, finish the fight, and then come back.
Sure.
So, our train up, fortunately, Carson, what perfect place to train up for the mountains. Yeah. There's mountains everywhere there.
Right.
So a lot of it was walking, getting comfortable, carrying under load, and talk about being a light fighter. You had to have that mentality. And that was drilled into you, at Carson. That train up was valuable because it's a mentality. It's a mental shift. So, hey, you're going to feel sorry for yourself, but you're going to feel worse when you can't carry your own weight and someone has to carry it for you, because you're letting somebody down. Again, come back to team sport. Yeah. And then you have to get to the fight. It's like, hey, you want to do cool guy stuff? Well, guess what? This is what you signed up for. You're going to do it. Yeah. Right? This is, hopefully you have the little grit. If not, then don't worry, we're going to get you up there. I think the greatest part clicking was when guys looking left and right of you, you didn't want to let that person down. Yeah. And you're like, hey, I have to carry my own and make sure that, I already have enough to carry, but I sure don't want my bag to be carried by somebody else. And if you were a leader, like a lieutenant or a sergeant or a sergeant first class, definitely don't want to be that guy who had to, lay off your pack to somebody else to carry for you.
Yeah. I like how you summarize that into a couple of the things that, one, you had to be prepared for, because you can't just OJT your way to being physically fit and to be understanding, how to use your fires as well. Right. So that you did that when you were back in the rear as you were preparing for it, because it's so common to what we're doing right now. Right. And so it can be replicated again. If you focus on those things right now, you will be the most prepared for what we don't know is coming. Right. We can prepare for what we know will come. You'll have to use your fires. You need to be physically fit. You have to work together as a team. Right. But there's so much that we don't know about what might happen in the future. And we can take care of what we know is going to happen. Right.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And there's General Evans says it the best, and he's been preaching it since he got here 2 years ago. It's like, hey, everything, be brilliant at the basics. The basics is where the fundamentals are. And if anything else, train for ambiguity. What are you for? And that's what General Perkins said it back then. I think when he was a trade out commander, and it stuck with me. He said, hey, what is the Army for? That purpose driven. And, at scale, I dropped that back down. And I was like, what is the infantry battalion for? What is a rifle company for? And so at the end of the day, you have to close with and destroy the enemy. And that's your job. Scar everything else, whether it be coin or LISCO. At the end of the day, you have to be able to close with and and then finish the fight. So get back to the basics, right? And I'm not going to say the dead Prussian's name because a lot of people will make fun of me for it. But there is a little bit of a saying is like, hey, war is simple, but simple things is probably the most hardest and most difficult to do. Right. And it's true, and it's timeless. And that was a 18th century, 19th century saying, and it still resonates today. Yeah. It's because it's human nature, friction. We don't know the ambiguity. So how do you train for it? You just can't throw up your hands and say, well, I can't train on anything. Well, go back to what you know, go back to what you're for. And then from there, if you could do the basic and simple thing, then everything else will follow. Because if not, then those are the ankle biters at the end of the day that will, get people killed.
And the things that you've been saying for the last 10 or 15 minutes, it's obvious to me why you are the leader that you are today, because of the things that you kind of grew up and you saw. But when you first started talking, you said, I was going to do this infantry thing for like 3 to 4 years, So what was it that made you stay? Like what was it that you saw or went through that said, I'm going to do this for a little bit longer?
Yeah. So,
or a lot longer.
So yeah, my first was that first deployment I talked about. It was a hard, difficult, but really rewarding period as a platoon leader to lead in combat. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to do what, at the time, Casey Thorian, who was my company commander at the time, he was a rifle company commander, and I wanted to do that. So that kept me in for the second go. Yeah. I got to do that as a rifle company commander in combat, got to do it as a HAC brigade company commander in combat. And that kept me in. And, there's, just like most captains nowadays, there's an off ramp. It was like, okay, I got to do what I want. I got the experience. And it's not because being selfish. I really enjoyed being around the people. The infantry culture it's unexplainable, but the amount of people that you surround yourself with is, it's humbling. Yeah. And and it's not just officers. The best memory I have is my first driver as a platoon leader when I just took over. His name was Clemens, but he introduced himself over the head mic. And he's like, hey, sir, you're my new lieutenant. My name's Clemens. If you have a hard time spelling it, and so you spell that with C with lemons. And then, and I could not, those are the people, and Clemens and I, we bonded. And those are so many people like that throughout my time. And coming to command was no different. I found huge amount of satisfaction and joy of mentoring lieutenants and sergeants alike. Most of them who I keep in contact now. Most of them are out doing great things. Americans, and they went to go be an MBA, got their MBAs in business. But at that off ramp point, I remember telling Sarah, I was like, okay, I think I did company command, I did what I want. Now maybe it's time to pursue a PA program. Yeah. So I looked into the IPAP program, the Inter-Service Physician Assistant program for the Army. And, my year group shifted one year group to the left. So when I applied, they're like, hey, there's no majors. Because my goal in my head, I had a vision. I was like, I'll drop an IPAP, go through IPAP, pursue what I wanted to do in the medical community, pursue my vision of practicing medicine in the Army. And then maybe I'll go to regiment, or I'll go, to some SMU unit, or come back in an infantry battalion. And, IPA's like, sorry, I can't take you, because unless you go to the reserve, you can't be a major as a PA in an infantry battalion or any battalion. So I said, okay. And I think the most disheartened person at the time, because I remember coming home, was my wife. And, she was like, oh my God, this is what you wanted to do. And I was like, it's not that bad. I love what I did as a company commander. I love my field grades at Fort Carson. You talk about setting the organization team that you remember and you just want to emulate. That was, as a company commander, looking up to my field grades and my boss. I still try to replicate that wherever I go. Jared Borwells of the world, Jim Pangelina and Scott Green, Danny Day. Those are the top 5 that we all just looked up to. And I remember in that bonding period, that 13-month train up, and if you set the culture right, and I think, that family feeling is what carried us through, in my opinion, through that whole difficult deployment. And that second time around. And is something that they, you talk about like, hey, don't be the field grade that's salty. Surely there are days when you have field grades like that. And I'm sure, talked to a lot of people. I've had a lot of days, more so than others. But they made things, they're like, they had to be serious when they had to, but they did not take themselves seriously. And in a good way. Yeah. They showed part of their humanity. They were approachable. If you had problems as a company commander or as a staff officer, you were able to, talk to them in any way and get problem solved. And that's something that I wanted to be like as a field grade, or at least a leader and as a formation. And that was, imprinted on me as I came in to battalion command. But again, that's company command, sir. And then I went to CGSE, did the extra year at SAMS, and then came to 25th. and talk about going from direct leader to organizational, at least your taste of organizational leadership. Because, you get the year at CGSE and the SAMs, and then come out. I got to work for General Cavoli at the time, and General Sazav was the G3.
Yeah.
So, you want to talk about a year of just learning. The S was General Andrziak and Colonel Davis, and General Val came in. So you had this like head shed of just big brain of intellectual power there, and being a planner in the 25th was just intimidating.
Yeah.
So like Dan Burke and Calvin Tage were my buddies up in division staff, and talk about learning how to fight. You want to talk about LISCO fighting at the division and above level. We got our taste of going through multiple exercises here and learn. We truly got to learn outside of battalion and brigade tactics, starting to look at other enablers, other warfighting functions. And I did. It was a year of just intellectual growth. It was painful, but I'm glad for it, because the leaders there asked all the right questions, and we all didn't know.
Yeah.
And that's where a valuable staff, that's where I kind of opened my eyes. It's like, hey, if you have a good trained staff, you got to train them when, and warfighters and CPXs are a method to train those staffs, so that you can, you understand your own warfighting function, and two, bring the team together, so that three, you provide options to the boss.
Yeah.
And so that was a good year of just getting to know what, one, being a good field grade is, two, being a good teammate. Because if you as a major on any staff, that's your currency. Your currency is either have to be a good teammate, or you have to be able to, work around people or with people. And that organizational leadership is the first taste you get on any kind of staff. I highly recommend anybody trying to go through that they start on the division or core staff, because it's invaluable. And I still reflect back to that point.
Yeah. When I hear you talking about all these things, my mind is thinking about how do you kind of look back and say, how did you become the leader that you are? What were the situations, the circumstances, the events that you went through, the things that we always say that was painful, but I learned so much. Like, what were they, right? And then how do you replicate them for people when it's your turn to be in charge? Like when you're the field grade, how do you do that for the lieutenants and the captains? When you were the battalion commander, how do you do with it for your battalion? And now, not too many years from now, you're going to be one of those, strategic leaders that's going to have to do similar things and create those situations for majors and captains to learn, right? Because if you neglect them of those tough situations, those reps and sets, as General Williams always says, if you neglect them of those things because they were hard or because they were uncomfortable, those leaders won't become or won't be the leader that you became, right?
Yes, sir.
You also think about the path at which we took, right? And everybody's path is slightly different, right? But everybody's path that becomes a senior leader, or everybody's path that becomes the leader that they hope to be, there's always these challenges, right? That's what's similar. They're different. My challenges and your challenges are different, but there were some challenges that were so gut-wrenching, that were so hard to get through. And when you make it through on the other side, you start saying, well, if I made it through that, I'll be okay. And now how do I create those for the people that are around me?
Absolutely. Yeah, that has been, how do you replicate those same conditions without, having to force them? Because I think everyone learns, I know that everyone learns differently. And that's right. The first thing I've learned in command and as a battalion commander. So when you go from company command, you can control your own training factors and circumstances for your organization as a platoon. But now as battalion commander, you have 4, line companies, or 3 line companies as part of the transformation, and 2 other companies that, one was an FSC, but now it's an HAC and what used to be an FSC. So how do you now train at scale so that everyone gets that type of condition, so that they understand the learning? What's the training objective, right? And when you go to the CTCs, that's what the first thing they ask is like, hey, what are your training objectives? How can we formulate and help so that you can either see yourself, certify yourself, or, validate the things that you want, that you as the training audience do. And that has, kept me on the drawing board for a while. To me, I think what I did is I had to take a lot of appetite suppressant. My first year, I wanted to do it all. I was like, I'm going to train all these officers and NCOs to make sure that they are the best version of themselves, and we're going to get them good training. But what I found is that the more I poured into it, the more work and stress level increased. So I had to be like, oh, I take a break, because I got a lot of feedback. It's like, hey, you're in the battalion and you are running it to the ground, because there's a lot that you want to do, and everyone's trying to do it. But there's at some point where it's not, the return is not good. It's not what you're going to get, because everyone's just doing it. Just to do it, not to learn. And I said, okay. So it was good feedback. And that was good feedback from NCOs. That was great feedback from staff duty officers. We make them, provide some feedback, and those type of feedback are important. And I think any battalion commander or commanders out there, you got to have some kind of feedback mechanism. Surely as a company commander, I had like trusted agents of specialists, sergeants, and lieutenants, and they told me unsolicited, and sometimes solicited, they came and told me. And I think it's because, you don't want to be the person who's just running the organization to the ground. But, the art, I think, is, and that's where feedback is important, is that, okay, where's the threshold where you can do the learning, but you're not destroying at the same time? And that rear stat is always, you have to have your hand on it so that you understand if you have to dial it back or you can, crank it forward.
And I think when you talk about the Rio stat, now that I see this as the cog, at JPMRC, is like when you have to dial it back, right? Whether you're a battalion commander or brigade commander, I think that shows you where the breakdown was, right? And what I mean by that is like if they're feeling like they're being run into the ground to do, let's say it's a battalion attack, and now you're trying to incorporate fires into that, casualty evacuation into that, and then you got some role players. There's three things, right? Which one is going to be the breaking point? Well, they were pretty good with the fires. They were okay with the casualty evacuation, but as soon as you threw the role players into there, it broke them.
Yeah.
Right. So you had to dial it back a little bit. Why? Because during the train up, they had never even had an opportunity to think about training role players, civilians on the battlefield, something like that. And so it gives you this, okay, that was an area that they didn't get to. At what level? They didn't get to it at the company level. They never even got a chance to kind of practice that. And that's just one example of like, where did they not get to train? And so what I don't want to do at a culminating training event is throw 15 things at them that they never got a chance to train up on. I might throw one or two because this is the only opportunity that they'll get to train on it at a CTC.
That's right. No, I agree, sir. I don't think a lot of it has to be scripted, right? Because I relate everything, and that's the thing for command was, I wanted to translate everything back to combat. It's like this, we're doing this because in combat, this is what you're going to see. I go back again to my experiences. Like I wish, I always said this to the lieutenants or to the officers. Like I wish the enemy would just stay exactly where they would when I try to shoot at them, right? So like, don't move. I want you to sit right there so I can shoot at you. That doesn't happen like that.
Right.
So you have to train for the unexpected. Civilians on the battlefield. Okay. Well, guess what? We didn't train for it. You're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. And you have to do that. You have to think through it, be a critical thinker. And so you just like, oh, it's not in my manual. It's like, okay, you don't have time for manuals. You have to assess the situation. And this is where I think, going back a little bit is what I didn't want is I don't want people to regret when they have to do their actual job. And when we are actually in a two-way firing range, I said, I wish I could have trained on this, or I wish this is the way, this is, why didn't I get taught this? Or where's my phone so I can look up this battle drill? It should be intuitive. Or if it's not something you trained on, then how do we think through that situation and address it? Address it in a way that meets the intent of commanders at echelon. So having a little ambiguity and throwing unscripted things that, people may have not trained on, then and I do agree, like 15 probably things that they didn't train on to, just like, all right, figure it out. Yeah. I think you lose some training value, But going back to training objectives, I think that's why I told Steve, I was like, here's the 4 things that I want the battalion to be trained on, look at. And, because at the time it was, hey, can we do the basic things right? Can we put up security? Are we doing, patrol briefs? Do we have accountability? Because if you can do some of those things, those basic things, then we can build on those. But if we can't get to those, then, then we have some problems.
Yeah. And, look into where we are at today versus the way we trained 20 years ago, right? At Fort Bragg and at Fort Carson, right? When you went out to those ranges, there was no civilians on the battlefield. Like there was nobody out there. It was just you and your unit. It was quiet, right? It was just you and anything that you kind of scripted. Operation Pathways, what you just did in the Philippines, there was people everywhere. Yeah. Like people live there. Like those training areas are people's farms and there are civilians that live there. They're watching what you do. They're a part of everything that you do. There's no such thing as hiding, right? They saw you drive into that fighting position, right? Like everybody knows you're there, right? And it's, you can't teach that in Area J at Fort Bragg. There's nobody out there to see. You think you snuck in.
Yeah.
Right? That is not the case. It wasn't the case in Afghanistan. It wasn't the case in Iraq. It's not the case in Syria. It's not the case in the region here, in the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia. Everywhere we go, someone is going to see us show up.
That's
right? They're going to see you there. They're going to see what you brought. They're going to see how you pulled into the battle space, right? They're going to watch you set up your artillery. Someone's watching. Right?
That's right.
They're going to see all those things. And so it's a different mindset now. It's like, how do I operate when everything I'm doing, my adversary is going to see?
Yes, sir. Yeah, no, the Pathways was a eye-opening, it's something like my 3rd, 4th Pathways. But this time around, going as a battalion commander and participating in Salakan and Balgatan, it was different. To your point, everything, we didn't train as much on civilian on the battlefield. And we knew that going in because of past years AAR saying, hey, Fort McSaysay is a bit open. There's people coming through. Adversaries are going to, they're everywhere. They're watching. There are things that you can't hide. So those are the constants that you just have to account for. It was a training opportunity, where there's risk, there's opportunity. Yeah. So it's an opportunity for us, especially, when I talk with the top 5, it's like, okay, how do we train this and make sure our company commanders and first sergeants are prepared, our leaders. So after we came back from the FPC in December, we said, hey, you guys are going to all do a cocoa head hike as a company. And, I got a lot of pushback. Like, why do we have to do this? And I was like, because I want you to think through, because it's not a training area 1. So you're going to have to think through all the factors that you'd have to consider when you're out there doing the real space out in the Philippines. Because you have to think about civilians. You have to think about messaging. You have to think about safety, risk. Those are things and you have to back brief it. It's not just because you can just go out there. You have to make sure that it's deliberate, just like any other operation. You have to consider those real world factors. And this is as real world as going to get. So I want you to go and do a cocoa head hike. And I put some, it's like, this is good physical training, put a ruck on. You don't have to be in uniform, but, just so that you have something to put a little bit of weight on. And it's going to give you a lot to think through, because I want you to be the critical thinker at the time. And I want you to work through it. And so a couple of feedback was like, hey, that was good. There was some things that we thought about that, because they had it forced them to talk through the state park agencies, that we had to talk to division PAO, talk to our boss, make sure that he was good with it. Risk was acceptable. We mitigated what we couldn't, was accepted. I took the risk on, and it was great training. And flash forward to Philippines. Well, we get to Balgatan, we're working for the Marines, and we get launched up to an island up in Itbayat. And we're on people's farmlands. Yeah. There is no training area there, to your point. Magsaysay or Itbayat or Kalayan. And so we had to operate on those farmlands. People were coming up to people and saying, hey, what are you doing? Yeah. Why are you here? Right. Mm-hmm. So, they were able to think through some of those. It's an area security mission, but they got to do, I won't say coin's a taboo word, but same lessons that we learned 20 years ago is still applicable on Pathways. That we just have to, re-teach, or it was a moment for them. It was an opportunity for them to kind of get a taste of what we did for the past 20 years.
Yeah.
And we
could go on this topic for hours about the things that you learned growing up, and now they're part of the exercises that we're running. I feel like the exercises and the way we're doing them out here in the Pacific, right, are fundamentally different than the way I grew up, right, from a training standpoint, because we're making that a part of the day-to-day operation. Everything we do on Hawaii, on the Big Island, any of these islands that any of these exercises, all those things you have to take into consideration.
That's right.
Right? You can't even get in your vehicles and head north without sending somebody out there to make sure that the road is open, that the bridge, they're working on the concrete, right? Like if that's shut down, you're going to have a log jam that's out there. And all of a sudden you have 20 something vehicles like stacked up. That's a big, huge target for your adversary, right? And so you have to think about those things on just a day-to-day basis, just to go through the typical training, right?
That's right.
And it should be, as it should be, it is a part of becoming part of these junior leaders mentality. They have so much more on their plate than I think I did as a lieutenant.
Oh, absolutely. More than I did, especially in the Pacific and Hawaii. I think General Clark and General Williams and General Gerard said it. Like Hawaii in itself, you're going to learn about deployment. You just don't think about it as a deployment as in going. I mean, you have to think about everything you just talked about. Logistically, when you get to the PTA, I've never been on a boat, like on a series, like have to do a boat movement until I got here as a field grade.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, guess what? We got to move your stuff. When I was in 214 as the XO,
yeah.
You got to move your stuff over to PTA. I was like, okay.
And you're not going to see it for a couple weeks.
Yeah, no one's going to move it for you. That's you, right? Yeah. You have to make sure that you get with the brigade mobility, division DTO. You have to, contract this or get it through LSV. So it makes you think through. It is different here because the archipelago fight is not contiguous. There is no interior lines here. I can throw on a train like I
and if you forgot something back in the rear,
that's right.
It doesn't just show up in 45 minutes.
And that's right. And that's the part where I think a lot of people don't appreciate. When I say appreciate, when you have to, you get to truly test your readiness out here.
Yeah.
So if you didn't have your CDDB program wasn't good because you didn't have enough UMOs or hazmat, it's going to show. Yeah. By the time you need to get down to the MDF and you're like, oh, I don't have TCAIMS access because I didn't access it for over 30 days.
Yep.
Well, guess what? You're not ready to move. Oh, you don't have enough batteries for your EMVGs? Okay, well, then you weren't looking at your supply rate and getting ready to go to war stock or your go bags. Oh, you didn't have enough magazines for your guys. Okay, then you really need to look through your supply programs. Oh, your per staff's not correct. Okay, then you don't understand your combat power and your availability. Mm-hmm. So those are things that and shout out to all the field grades, right? So like my last team here, Jeremy Klein and Matt Rivas, and then team one, like Chris Chamalis and Sam Herberts of the world, who talk about run the organization. Field grades, They for sure. They took my great ideas of everything I wanted to do as a battalion commander. I entrusted them, and they made literal scribbles on the back of a paper. And they made that, and they operationalized it. And great field grades like those, they can take those things and they can run with it. And it's been amazing to watch them grow, just them. And then having the sergeant majors, my first Stephen Daggett, my second just Eric Rodriguez. Talk about a person who keeps you grounded. And, I've been very fortunate in the Army to have been paired up with great senior NCOs. And, the past 2 years have not been, it hasn't been the exception. It's been great for them to just tell me where I'm falling short or giving me different perspectives from their point of view, from their experience. And that's where I think I invested a lot of my time these past 2 years is, if you say if people had a war council, my top 5 was my war council, right? That's where I spent most of my time mentoring, coaching. That was my team. When the whole thing was like, hey, who's your squad? What's your squad? Like my team and squad was the top 5. And I spent a lot of time through them to try to take my vision of what I wanted to do and have them operationalize it. It's like, okay, go forth. And if not, if it doesn't make sense, come back to me and let's talk it through. And if you got, and I had to create that environment for them, say, hey boss, this is too much.
Yep.
And they were candid and I let them, but I pushed back a little bit just so that I can make sure that there's some validity and logic for their pushback. And, we made, we had good candid jokes, inside jokes about that. And, that's, I think that's just human nature. That's the climate I wanted. Again, going back to what I envisioned as what I saw as a top 5 as a company commander. And I let them run with it. And I said, hey, I just want you guys to come, give me some feedback, run with it until you guys can't. And then, then I'll take the risk. Just let me know what those risks are.
For sure.
And when I was the 3-5 at core, I heard General Brunson say a great thing. He said, hey, there's no decisions that you guys can make that I can't undo. Right. And I just took that and I said, hey, there's no decision, like make decisions on my behalf. Here's my intent. Here's my left and right parameters. Here's what I'm willing to do. Make decisions along the way, those micro decisions, because I didn't want people to wait on me or the organization. Make the decisions and then just come back and tell me what you did so that I understand what risk I'm taking and accepting. Because there's nothing that decisions you guys make that I can't undo. I can go back and, I can have that veto vote. But along the way, just tell me so that we can continue to move the organization throughout, so that we're not waiting on one person. Because there's nothing more frustrating, I think, in an organization than waiting. But that's a double-sided sword, because sometimes it does require, and that's one thing that I know about myself, is that I want to make decisions and I have good, it comes from a good place, but tactical patience is another thing. Sometimes those decisions have to wait because I don't have all the information. And so I learned that the second year. It's like, hey, the second year, like, let's take a pause, like think through, I didn't want to make, I was like, as much as impulsively I wanted to make that decision now, I was like, I need more information. So, I would go back to the staff or go back to the commanders, like, hey, please come back with a little bit more information. And then, I know that frustrated a couple of people, but to me at the time, I was practicing what I got feedback from as I was growing up. Because, I reflect and stride, right? All the feedback you get from mentors and peers, like that was one of the things that, I wanted to make sure that I made it right. Because some of those decisions at some point, especially when it comes to pathways, you have to make sure that it's right because you only get one shot at those decisions.
Yeah. So a couple of things you just said, was you said vision. You used the word culture, right? You talked about systems. You talked a little bit about like ideas that you had for the battalion when you become the commander, and then you got some feedback, right? There's three kind of. First, the commander, drives a vision for this organization and the way that they go, and the way that kind of permeates out is through the culture of the organization, right? In order, then you move into like a strategy. You kind of have a strategy for how you're going to kind of make that happen. You're gonna have some systems that you're going to put in place. You're going to have some steps along the way to kind of make sure you can get towards that vision, right? Yes, and then the third part of that triangle becomes like execution and how you're going to execute it. It's the little things. It's the brilliant and the basics, right? It's the discipline that comes around. That's a much easier said than done, right?
Absolutely.
So when you go back to the vision and you go out all the things that you've learned throughout your career and you've said, this is the vision, this is the direction that this organization was going to go, right? What did you hope your organization was going to be known for? And that becomes the vision, that becomes the culture for the Gimlets.
Yeah, so I wanted to make sure that the battalion, the task force was known to be ready. Right? Lack of a better phrase is that if we got called upon, we were ready and we were able to be lethal at what we do and be able to be reliable in whatever we get asked to do. That was the vision. The culture, I would say I was fortunate. I inherited a lot of that culture and climate from my predecessors. And, as you know, I think it started probably way back when you and Colonel Turner were here, started, and then, got to Dave Bernay. And then I inherited that from Colonel Bernay. And it was, and the NCOs, right? So Sergeant Major Curry's, prior to him, Sergeant Major Mobar, Sergeant Major, Daggett, now Sergeant Major Rodriguez. And it's not just the senior NCOs, it's all the NCOs within the formation, all the officers, that culture and the Gimlets, and just the Warrior Brigade. And it's not just the Warrior Brigade. No, Broncos have the same and every other brigade here. Right. I think that culture, I didn't want to be the reason why, it flattened, if you will. So not knowing much about Gimlets coming, even I was here as Warrior 5. And then when I came on the list coming up, I had to, school myself a lot about the Gimlets. I wanted to make sure that that's what, one, the culture was maintained and that our story was told. And so you had to be the biggest champion in that because no one else is going to do it, I think, right? I think some people will buy into it but no one else will do it except the commanders and sergeant majors. So you have to be all in. Second, you talked about the process of, vision and strategy. And it's funny because, I've been reflecting on that for the past couple of years. Doctrine, I don't want to be that guy, but in the center, the commander's in the middle of that operations process. And just like anything else, they have to drive it.
Yeah.
And, that not only that commander is in the middle of that operations process, they have to provide the energy. That just like any systems, if we're going to go back to, systems theory, is that you have to, that anything you power, just think about a car, it has to come from somewhere. Batteries, that battery, where's that power come from? Normally in a process anywhere else, the commander provides that energy, or somebody, right? That energy has to come from somewhere and has to energize it. And the vision changes as circumstances change, as as you're in command, things, different commander, different CG, whoever, whatever, different, company commanders or different mission set. As those change, your vision may have to change with it. And so you have to adjust, so that commander in the middle, or who's driving the operation process, you have to be able to adapt and adjust. So, what takes, I give you that because what I thought about is like, where does that energy come from? We talk about H2F and having to take care of yourself as a commander, like in any commander at echelon, even a company commander, lowest commander, that energy has, if it's from you, then how do you recharge?
Yeah.
Right? Is it good PT? Is it reading? Are you an introvert, extrovert? How is it that you're taking care of yourself? Then you can get back into that organization, whatever systems it is, right? Is it the process that you care about, the lethality? If you yourself, and you're that person who's driving that train, right? And you don't have any more energy to give to the organization, then normally that, it's going to whittle. Was
there anything that you noticed, through the first year, it could be second year, right? But was there anything that you noticed that when you did as a commander had a much bigger impact on the organization than you thought it would?
Oh, no, that's
whether it be good or bad, but a bigger impact than you thought it would have had.
I don't think I can attribute anything to myself. If anything else, it was, it's like almost like a proud parent moment. When you allow the organization to kind of run and you empower them to make decisions and do things, and they would surprise you. Like it was a pleasant surprise, right?
Yeah.
When you're like, wow, that just happened. For example, best squad, right? So the Gimlets won the best squad. Little to almost, I would say little guidance provided by me. It's like, I think the only thing I said to the best squad, to Sergeant Hayes before he left for Air X-Ray, because we got to see them, was like, hey, I just want you to beat the Rangers this year, please. And that's the only ask I have. Please beat Regiment this year. And that was, but I know so they came out of Charlie Company. TJ Burgess and Donnie Castle was the first sergeants at the time. Steve Daggett was a sergeant major. And a lot of that, preparation, building, team building. And I know the best squad went over to Lightning Academy and they got trained up there. So it was a whole of effort, division effort. But a lot of that, to the point was, we allowed them to do it. They trained them, essentially our subordinate leaders, our junior leaders developed that. They took it upon themselves. And they went out and won. And it was, it was during JPMRC. Our battalion just got done going through, 4 battle periods at Bazelon.
Yes.
And I was feeling sorry for myself a little bit. And then, I got a phone call like, hey, we want best squad. And I was like, and you surpassed?
That's pretty cool.
Like, no, best army. We want best squad. And I was elated. At the same time, I was like, wow, that happened. So I don't attribute that anything I did, but it was definitely, our company commanders, our first sergeants, our junior leaders, Staff Sergeant Hayes and Burtons of the world that took that, that's just small example and ran with it.
Well, I think there's like 4 or 5 things that you did. You say I can't take credit for it myself, but there's 4 or 5 things that you did just in this circumstance alone. 1, get the hell out of everybody's way. Right? 2, give them the opportunity to go out there and focus on it. How many times have we heard the story of you can't go to this school, you can't go to air assault school, you can't go to ranger school because we've got a CTC rotation coming up?
Yeah.
We've all heard it 1,000 times.
That's right.
But instead it was, those guys are going to be sheltered, push them off to the side. They're training up for best squad. That's what they're going to go do.
Yes, sir.
For the weeks and the months ahead of time. You gave them the opportunity, or somebody in the organization the opportunity, and you got the heck out of the way, and you got them the resources that they needed in order to be successful.
Yep.
And if you do that often enough, good things happen, right? And people go, "Oh, we just got lucky." Bullshit, you just got lucky. You've done that same thing so many times to make people successful. This one just happened to be best squad. What about the other competitions? What about the other opportunities for somebody to go to Ranger School, get their tab, and come back? And it changed the trajectory of their career.
That's right. No, and those are absolutely important. Just for this instance, I guess I just can't attribute it directly to what I did. But I do,
But the culture that you create, that people created before you and you guys sustained, that was the culture that led to this.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And, some of that is my initial counseling with Colonel White at the time, and again, I take a little bit from everybody everywhere I go. And, one of his counseling statement, he says like, hey, lead like you want to be, command like you want to be commanded. I won't look over your shoulder. You won't find me there. And I was like, hey, wow, what a powerful statement. That is like what I go back to as a company commander. I didn't have Scott Green or anybody else look over my shoulder. Yeah. It was just intent, end state. If anything else, the pressure was back on me to back brief so that I don't violate that trust. And I was like, hey, you give me this so much rope. I don't want to violate it. So I'm going to make sure that I'm meeting the intent that you're giving me, the latitude. And I wanted to make sure that our company commanders and leaders got that same amount of latitude. All I asked them back was reciprocation of like, hey, just over communicate what you're doing so that, again, I understand the gaps where you're doing or decisions that it's not going off the azimuth or intent that or my intent or, our boss's intent so that you are all aligned.
Yeah. You brought up Graham White's name, and years ago, Graham White, when he was 2P6 and the 82nd Airborne, he put together a document that he called, "We are going to win All-American Week," right? Yeah. And he articulated what does it mean to win at All-American Week? Why is it important to be successful during that? I stole that document and I tried to make it for the Rattlesnakes, right? For Tropic Lightning Week. Because I don't think the Rattlesnakes had ever won an event in Tropic Lightning Week ever. Like, I don't know if we ever have won a single event, never mind compete against whether it be the Wolfhounds or Cacti. It was like, can we just win one event? Can we just place in an event, right? And I used that document because I said, that's the culture I'm hoping to have around here.
Yes, sir.
Right? Which is everything that we do, we're going to approach it with this approach of winning and doing our absolute best. And what does it take to be the best? What does it take to prepare for those things? And this is an example of like, he created that environment as a brigade commander and allowed you to kind of take that same culture and that climate going forward.
Absolutely.
And now I'm trying to do the same thing with JPMRC, right? And it's create the culture for an organization to be successful, for their people to be as successful as possible in everything that it is we do.
And I think, yes, sir. And I appreciate that because that reminded me of something. When you guys were commanders here, so you, Tim Peterman, Luke Kangas, and Rick Turner, I just remember, and Brian Shoemaker, it was a little friendly competition between all of you. And I remember being in the Snakes, and then as Warrior 5, just being envious of all the battalion commanders having this friendly banter, friendly competition amongst peers and organizations. It was social media for you guys.
Yeah.
And I just remember, I told Colonel Peterman that we had to get in the game, and that kind of friendly competition. And, General Williams allowed that, to culture to grow. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, I wanted to create that, but, we didn't win Tropic Lightning Week. And that's the one thing I'll smashed. Give Tyler Patterson and Pete Lazinski. They've been, winning like 4 or 5 times. I think this is their 5th year winning the Guadalcanal Cup. That's if there's a regret, that's my one regret, not being able to win that thing. But I think those type of competition breeds greatness.
It breeds opportunity too.
Absolutely.
I went out to here's the story. I go out to the fields to check on our snakes and see how they were doing, right? And I go to the basketball court and like we just got smashed. We had like 7 people. We had 2 people on the bench. We were up against a team that had like 15 people on the bench. They were all 6'3". Like we got destroyed. So then I was like, okay, well, that was just one sport. I'm going to go over here to the ultimate Frisbee field, right? And I go over there and we've got about, I don't know, maybe 20 people. So we had about 5 people sitting on the sideline, and our folks were just exhausted. They were just gassed. And I looked across the field and it was like an infantry battalion that was over there with like 400 people on the sideline. And they were just rotating in fresh legs after fresh legs after fresh legs. And we got smashed. We were getting destroyed out there. Well, I said, Sergeant Major, we're going to hold the battalion formation. What, tomorrow? No, today. I want to speak to everybody. And we brought everybody in. We put them all in the snake pit. And I just said, I said how disappointed I was that we had left our teammates out there to hanging to dry. Like they were getting destroyed out there. And there was no Kazovac. There was no reinforcements. It was like, where is everybody? And it took us a while to get everybody. But I think on that day, I was like, this is an opportunity to let everybody know that that's not acceptable. Like this is not the kind of team that we want to be a part of, right? We want to be a part of a team that is going to send our folks out there, but we're going to support them. We're going to reinforce them. We might not be the best athletes, but we sure as heck are going to support them while they're out there giving it everything they got.
Yes, sir. And those friendly, that surprised me when you asked me about one of the things that come to mind. I didn't know how much of the guys want competition inside the battalion. Because at some point, we all grew up with mandatory fun, like, hey, we're going to do this because we have to. So I try to be respectful in that aspect. It's like, okay, let's just take some of the feedback. It's like we're doing too much Gimlet challenges or Gimlet games. But, some of the feedback is like, hey, we like competitions.
Yeah.
Because it keeps it gives an opportunity to, for one to say, hey, we won. It's a pride thing. Second, it also holds people accountable.
Yeah.
In that, it's like, hey, be better teammates. Let's put you out there and, showcase your strength, or it's okay weakness. At least we know where to work on.
Yeah.
And I wish, reflecting back, not a wish, but if I could do it again, probably integrate more of those internal competitions so that those opportunities, then it's the mindset of, again, like winning.
Yeah. The other thing, and it comes from a book, Pegasus Bridge, and it's like, he was always, as the company commander, he was always like, given his guys opportunities for challenges to go out there in different kinds of circumstances to deal with different type of scenarios to try to be victorious, because they didn't know what they were going to have to do on D-Day. They knew they were going to have to jump in and seize the bridge, but they didn't know what they were going to have to do on day 2. And so they needed to be, prepared for just about anything. When I was growing up as a lieutenant in the 82nd, we had just come home from Fallujah, right? And we were getting ready to go on block leave. And right before we went on block leave, Colonel Drinkwine brought the battalion, and we were going to do ultimate. Basically, it was like ultimate football, but instead of using the Frisbee, we used a rugby ball. And so now we've got like half the battalion on one side and half the battalion of officers on the other side. And it was just like ultimate football, but you can't throw a rugby ball very far, right? The other thing is that the one thing that was modified was you could advance the ball forward. So, but if you pitch the rugby ball forward, but now you could be tackled. Yeah. So if you tried to run forward, you could be tackled. But what it quickly turned into is, as soon as somebody got the ball, they were just tackled. Oh, I think he was going forward. And it was just a slaughter, right? It was called Panther Ball. At the end of this hour and a half to 2 hours, we had 2 people went to the hospital, 3 or 4 serious injuries. I think one guy had to get out of the Army. I had a high ankle sprain. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to run. I wasn't sure how bad the damage was. But one of the captains said this as we were walking off the field, and he kind of in the group, he said to the commander, he goes, "Sir, why did we do that? Like, we just wounded like half the battalion." And he said, well, we got a lot of new people in this battalion, right? We got a lot of new people that just showed up. In 10 minutes, I knew who my warriors were and who wasn't.
Yeah,
that's it.
That's awesome, because so Lieutenant PT, what I did was, in that focus, we created something called multi-ball. So we normally went out to one of the fields here on HMR, And something like Panther Ball, like what I got this from when I was a director at 3-5 up at Corps, my deputy, an Australian, Tom Johnson. Love the guy. He's going to take command out in Australia. Here, this squadron command. He's a Cav guy.
Cav life.
His big cavalryman. So he taught us footy, Australian footy, but I took that idea when I came here called multi-ball. And really, it's just conglomeration of soccer, ultimate frisbee, ultimate football. And we had multiple balls on a field, and you had in different point scales, and it was continuous. There was no out of bounds, and it was multiple balls, and it was 3 sports at once.
Yeah.
And kind of the same way, it was rough, and you could be as aggressive or not, but everyone had to play. It didn't matter. There was no set rules. And, same thing is like, sir, why did we play? What's the point of this? Like, there's no like rules. It's like combat. There's really generally no rules. Like anything can happen. And it gives you have to keep your head on a swivel, and you could do as less as you want. You can just be off.
You could just be the guy doing laps
circling
around,
right? Not
getting involved,
right.
Perfectly clean.
Or you could be the guy or gal who's just going in there and, Mackenzie Griner, my meadow at the time, she really got really into it. And, she was like, like she was screaming, "Boar, brother, boar," and everything was. She was super soccer, and then she was play frisbee at the same time. And then we had people who just were like, "Okay, I'm just gonna, I'm not a sports person, so I'm just gonna go off to the side." And it was so that you can choose how you wanted to contribute. Yeah. And combat is the same. Like you have to, either know that by yourself. Like, okay, you don't know how to play, then learn how to play. If you can't contribute that way, then figure out how to support it. And that is an aspect of, okay, this is combat's a team sport. So is everything we do. You have to be able to contribute as part of that team. So if you don't know that about yourself, that was a facet, just an analogy or a metaphor, and to that about Panther Ball. Same thing with multi-ball. And I did that every time. And then, I brought everybody back in. I was like, this is why we're doing this. We do it because combat, there's ambiguity, there's confusion. You have to be your heads always have to be on a swivel. You have to assess the situation. Oh, you don't know what the scores were because, you can score multiple times.
Right.
Well, that's like BDA. Who's going to keep your track of your own BDA in combat? It's like, it has to be you. Somebody has to keep track of that assessment. You have to assess the situation. We had new lieutenants come in. So like, yeah, you're not going to know that person's name. Transitions are important. So you better get to know that person really quick.
Right.
Oh, you didn't prepare because, I didn't. The only rules I gave was, here's how you score. This is who your teams are. If you didn't, and the veterans, so if you're on the battalion for a while, it's like, sir, how are you going to know who's on our team? It's like, well, team captains, you guys better figure it out.
Yeah.
Bring a belt next time. I don't care. Like, this is how it is, right? In combat, like, you better know where your people are at. You better know how to communicate. So, you have to find those creative ways, I think, to where there is, kind of going back to your question earlier, how do you create those circumstances or training environments? Right. You just have to get creative to find those similarities so that you can teach those moments. And I don't think some people it clicked right away. Others, I don't think it, I think they gradually got it, but it was another point in time or a event that we can point to and say, hey, we're trying to train you that way so that you can think about problems differently. Right? Yeah. But you got to understand the basics first. And just like anything else, like General Evans says, like how you do, one thing is how you do everything. And that has stuck with me. It's like, hey, if you're going to go into anything deliberate, multi-ball, the only again is I didn't do it right was Tropic Lightning Week, but you have to be deliberate about it. Yeah. And you have to think through it. You have to understand risk, prepare for it and execute and then assess and then execute again.
Yeah. Let's talk about risk. You just said you said risk a little bit, assuming risk, right? And a lot of times people, they will take putting a hand grenade into a bunker on a live fire and filling out your DTS within 5 days. They assume both of those things is the same type of risk, right? They don't know how to associate the difference between those two things, right?
Yes, sir.
How did you handle risk, right? And how did you have to articulate that with your battalion?
Yeah, this is I think where I fell short, if anywhere else, because I'll lead with that. I did not know what my own threshold was. Now, to that metaphor, I knew like hand grenade and DTS, two separate.
Yep.
And it depended, to me, was, okay, what, and I'll go back to what General Williams says, like, what's risk to self? Mm-hmm. What's risk to mission? And what's risk to organization? Right? And what's risk to force? So I kind of bended in that. It's like, okay, if I don't do this, am I going to get my ass chewed? Right? And, do I have enough to, take that and be like, all right, I can move that priority to the right. I don't need to address that right now. Is this going to get someone killed? Or if I don't address this now, and did we mitigate it? All right. Did the proper subordinate commanders and NCOs look at it the same way I'm looking at it now? And did they mitigate? Did they ask the right questions? I think that's where I spent most of my time.
Yeah.
And those are, I think, two different scenarios that are, I would say for a person in our experience can definitely look at it and like, okay, these are two, like DTS under 5 days, probably not as important as someone was about to throw the hand grenade for the first time in a live fire.
Yeah.
I think where it gets blurred is when both of them becomes, risk to, probably not to force, but risk to self. And when that, overlaps and it becomes a little gray, like, okay, I'm going to get my ass chewed for this because I'm not meeting some metric versus, let's say, hey, you're not meeting this requirement today. And I need you to do it right now. So everyone get in at 1800. We're going to do this. There was a certain time where as a battalion commander, I was like, okay. And I think I did that because it was about accountability, if anything else. But risk was, for me, hey, did we deliberately look at the event? And, we have to provide that to the commanders and our leaders. Did we look at the event holistically? Is it something that you yourself as a commander have to address? Yes. And then almost like a flow chart. Is it going to hurt people or get someone to, is it going to cause some injury? Then yeah, you should look at that as a commander. Yeah. Is it something that you can pass down? If it's not, then is it something that you can pass down to a subordinate commander or a lieutenant or a senior NCO to take a look at, mitigate? Okay, no. Are they trained? Do they have the experience to do that? Right. So that's separate. Experience, I think, provides the opportunity to ask the questions. And if someone hasn't back briefed you or at least looked at it, and I think the assumption is that someone has looked at it and they have the same experience. And that's what I learned is that normally they don't.
Right.
And unless you're comfortable with that as a commander at echelon, then you as a commander automatically assume that risk on day one. And you just want to make sure that that you're assuming the right risk, or at least you're assuming it with the mitigation that you're comfortable accepting whatever outcome that is. Because the alternative is not true as well, or true for me, is that if an event occurred and God forbid something happens, something deadly happens or someone gets injured or dies, then you reel everything back. You're like, okay, what happened? Like, let's do the 15-6 and let's go back and look through this. Did I ask the right questions? No. Normally when it comes down to it is everyone just made a lot of assumptions. It was like, I thought this person did this, or, oh, I thought the experience was right here. It wasn't. And so you can't get that time back. That person is already injured, or that person is already, gone, unfortunately, or that resource was lost. So instead of living in the worst part is that commander living in, for self, living in regret. It's like, I wish I could have, I should have, could have, instead of doing that, I always thought, okay, let's ask the questions now. And then when you guys are comfortable, I'm comfortable because you and I had this dialogue about risk, tactical risk or mission risk. We at least had the dialogue so that commanders who can accept that risk are accepting or at least delegating it. I think the worst part are the ones like the risks that you don't even know you're assuming. Yeah,
those are the worst ones.
We don't know. And that there's an art to it, because at some point where does trust come in? Right? Like to me, like trust is built both ways, and it's done by like micro actions or actions that you've given us or anybody, leaders, reason to trust is because you back briefed, you understood, you back articulate well, communicate the mitigations, you can envision and anticipate, and there's a trust that, hey, sir, if you're not, and understanding what risks you can take at your level, right? It's like, this is definitely not something that I need to, this is bigger than me. Like, this is something that could impact the brigade or division. That I need to go talk to Colonel Lamborn about that, or General Evans. It needs to be articulated up. Definitely not my risk to take. And there's maturity in that. Maturity comes from experience of understanding that, or someone giving you that feedback. And that is, I think the biggest topic as a especially as a battalion commander. I didn't appreciate it as a company commander. Yeah. I started to appreciate it on my boss's behalf as a field grade. And then I really thought about it as a battalion commander. And I remember Colonel von Benken, when he was in SAMS, I think he wrote his monograph about risk. And I was like thinking at the time, I was like, that's an odd topic to write about. And he's like, hey, if you think about it, it's really important in the Army. It permeates everything. It's not because, it's a CYA. It's just because we have limited resources. And God forbid, these are the people like your son, your daughter, right? And really, that's who you're really thinking about when you're making some of these decisions. Like, these are people that you're going to put in harm's way. And you want to make sure that you're making the right decision at the time. And it all comes back to risk. And how do you mitigate that? And
when, not to be... There's a lot of different types of risk, right? And I think the easier ones are like, the tactical risk, is it safe to execute this on a live fire range? And is it safe to do this as part of a situational training exercise, is landing helicopters in those are tactical risks, and those are a lot easier for people at younger levels to kind of understand where their line is, what they're allowed to do, and what decisions they're not allowed to make. I think the ones that as you become, either post battalion command or as you become a little bit more senior, is the things that you don't even realize you're accepting risk on months in advance, right? As you prepared for the Philippines, as you prepared for that deployment into the region, who made decisions on what equipment you were going to bring and what you weren't? Who made decisions on when you were going to send people forward? How many people were you going to bring? Right? Because there's a lot of risk that's
Absolutely.
involved. What equipment you chose to bring for JPMRC X, right?
That's right.
Because now all of a sudden you get ready to execute the exercise, and you're like, we didn't bring that equipment.
Yeah, that was a lot of so that was a lot of deliberate planning effort by the field grades, actually. So we asked that exact question. And I got a lot of grace and leeway from Colonel Lamborn and General Evans and from the staff in a higher echelon, because this mission was set. Like, hey, here's the mission set, and it was changing. Right, we don't know if it's going to get executed. We don't know if it's going to be just your battalion, multiple battalions. So I gave it to the field grades, just like they do. I was like, hey, I want some options, right? And I need to understand. Let's articulate back to our bosses what worked, because it's more so it's easier to critique a plan than ask for a COA. So we're going to give our bosses an option, a course of action. And then we're going to let them, we're going to articulate the risk. Like, hey, we're going to bring this package, because there was everything was ambiguous. We don't know what to bring, how much to bring, of what people, what equipment. So I was like, look, let's bring 2 company sets of this. We're going to bring this many combat power. We're going to try to max out the combat power, and then we'll let them, whoever above us, tell them that's too much or too little. Yeah. Because it's easier to shave away. It's like what General Brunson said, like I can undo this decision very easily. So be proactive, right? Bias for action. And that was his words. And I was like, all right, well, let's just have bias for action here and provide a course of action and help our headquarters or headquarters. In that aspect, the risk is like, okay, the risk to, and I knew this, is like wasting my field grade and my staff's time, right? Because they're doing all the data pull, how much cubic square feet it's going to take to fill out this. Okay, we're only taking 1 clue versus the 8 clues that we should take. Like, the risk is when we can only shoot 1 at a time for the live fire, right? Or 2. Like, do we leave this equipment behind? Okay, let's back brief that back to make sure that someone else is assuming that risk, because I'm comfortable with it. I was like, I can do it. I'll just figure it out. But if someone else had a plan that it wasn't going to fit for the equipment that they're expecting me to brief, I'd rather have them know that now. Circumstances can change, but I'd rather have them know that now versus, why didn't you bring that equipment? I was like, well, gentlemen, we briefed this, but we can try to make it work, right? And we're human, so we forget, because what we brief you now, we may not remember 6 months down the road. So it's a continuous over communication. And that's what I've always told myself and told the staff and the commanders, like, hey, just over communicate, right? Send it to me in an email so I can always research it back. Tell me when you're, see me face to face, so that when you want to talk about, buying down risks, is just for me, it's about, other people may see it differently, but to me, it's like, if you over communicate that, then, the pressure, then the accountability the onus is on me. Yeah. Like, I can take that, and, I can only blame myself. That's right. And when it comes down to, and this is the 3 things and this is a little segue, 3 things that I told myself, I won't yell at anybody, because I definitely grew up in that environment as an officer, but now I always had to take a step back before I'm like, okay, full send. Like, this is a teaching moment. I had to ask them myself before, hey, did I tell them what I want, right? Did I take what's in my head, the cursive knowledge that's in my head, and tell them what I want and articulate that, provide them the guidance? The second thing is like, did I give them the time to execute? Understand that some of it may be a short, like flash the bang. Others might be like, hey, you got 5 weeks to do this or 2 weeks to do this, right? And did they understand the expectation, right? So like same thing with number one, like, but did I provide them? Like, no, I know message sent necessary doesn't mean message received, right? And that's Dave E's favorite thing. It's like, okay, did all three get satisfied? And then if it's yes, I'm like, okay, that person and I are going to have a very frank conversation. I was like, I gave you all three. Give you time, give you expectation, give you what I want you, the task at hand. None of them was met. What's the issue, right?
Yeah.
At that point, I understand because, time value. There's of course things that could get in the way, but that's, I think we take accountability. We understand the risk when we come back to it, and we understand the task at hand, and we set that person up for success. It wasn't like it wasn't 100%, right? I had always, and my sergeant major reminded me, is like, sir, did you ask the 3? I was like, oh yeah. Let me double check. Did I ask? And I had to go back. I was like, did I set? Was it something I said verbally? Is that something I put in a note? Did that person know what I want? Or was it a mind? And at PCC, it was great. Jack Kelly did this, and I replicated it at Lieutenant University. He said, hey, I want 2 people to come up. I want you to think of a popular song in your head. Just do any song. It doesn't matter what. Maybe a Christmas song, and I'm like, okay. It's like, it's popular, right? And he made people like tap it, right? Tap the tune on the desk. And the other person had to guess what that tune is. Of course, it just sounds like a bunch of tapping. And he's like, what was it? And he's like, Jingle Bells. It's like, no, it was something else. And you're like, oh, I totally. And he's like, yeah, for the person playing it, it's still ringing in your head. Now that I tell you Jingle Bells, everyone has like this clarity that it's a song, right? But the person who's trying to hear the tap, they have zero idea. They know it's a song, they know it's a Christmas song, but they don't know what you're talking about. He's like, that's like intent. That's like your vision, right? It's clear, crystal clear in your head. But the person receiving it on the other end, based on their experience and knowledge and where they're at in their life and their career, they may not know what you're tapping. It's
not making sense. It's a whole nother song to them.
That's right. That's why, like, do they communicate verbally? Is it a face-to-face? Is it by email? You have to, and sometimes that other person may not just get it. And that's fine. Like, and those are the people in your organization, and you have to try to accommodate for that at scale. So how do you make sure that tapping is as clear as it gets? Oh, by the way, when you're a leader at different echelon, that tapping sound has to be carried by other people. So like, just think about that guy who didn't understand what you're playing. He's like your company commander who has to then, play it for his or her platoon leaders and sergeants. So like, this is the song that the boss wants you to play. I'm like, like, well, I have zero idea what you're talking about. It's like, what? It's just tapping to me.
You've been very, reflective throughout this whole conversation about like things that you've learned along the way and like the feedback that you got and how you kind of immediately started to implement, that into the next time you had a chance to do that. As you've thought about it though, what would you do? What would you, if you had to do it all over again? Right? What would you immediately do differently or more often, better, like right off the bat? Like this is what I would be doing differently.
I appreciate that, sir. So one thing I do want to do better is I think I would probably bring in my company commanders a lot sooner and have a lot more dialogue with them. And I've learned this from Tom Guthrie. I read his he's a PCC instructor. His piece of advice that he reflected on was when he was No Fear 6 back in the day. He said, hey, I defaulted to leave my company commanders alone because I think I gave them a lot more room because that's what I wanted. And I kind of said the same thing in my head. I was like, I'm just going to let company commanders be company commanders and provide guidance when I need to. And I'll do it. I'll just shoot them a note and then they can catch up that way. But I think I would have preferred and probably brought them in a lot sooner and had a lot more dialogue. I didn't do that well reflecting back. And I think I would have done that better if I had to do it again. And I think I could have been, I've interacted more so with, I think, my internal peers, but I think I wanted to do more so with the outer peers, right? So in the division, I had great time interacting with, like Paco Fernandez, who's the 8th SCB commander, or Clem Lamb, who's out somewhere, Liam Walsh, who was in 4th ID. So everybody else, but I didn't spend enough time, I think, interacting with other commanders across the division that I wanted to. And, because at this point in our careers, it's all about, and, you look around, stellar performers and people, Joe Burks of the world, division OICs. I mean, you talk about great Courtney Hall, who's currently the G2, John Abella, who's the G4. I didn't spend enough time, I think, cultivating that relationship, or because I was just so focused in. Mm-hmm. And, that was because by proxy of the advice I got before I came here, Matt Meyer, who was the CG's XO who I worked with at the time, he's like, hey, focus down and in, worry about the battalion, like everything else, like, don't worry. They say we're 80% about down and 20% about up. And I try to stay true to that. But if I do it again, I would spend about 50-50. I still focus 50%, but all in on the battalion, but also spend some of your time with your peers and cultivating those relationships.
Yeah. I think that people, they start off that 80-20 and they start to get to more of a 50-50 towards the end.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's because your level of comfort of understanding what your organization's good at, what your organization is already known for, what's the culture. They understand the way that you think. You've been able to communicate what you think, where your level of risk and acceptance is. That takes time. If some people are able to make the transition to 50-50 sooner because they were able to achieve those things faster, earlier in command. Yes, everybody wants to lead through the commanders and not through the staff. But it takes time for you to understand the staff and how it works, and for them to understand how you communicate, right?
Yes,
Some people that takes the full 2 years before they never really got a chance to kind of balance those things out and spend too much time.
That speaks to my heart here as a former XO. To me, I came in, this was like the one advice I gave my replacement. I'm like, hey, he just came from a 3-star command. I came from a 3-star command on my previous job. And I said, hey, we had this experience that we just came from, and we know what a professional staff at headquarters, general staff, supposed to look like, feel like. There's governance processes, there's ways, the staff functioned in a certain way, and they brought that expectation down my first year. I'm like, yeah, battalion staff, we should be crushing some prods and, doing things for the commanders, free them up. And then same realization that first year I was talking about. I was like, man, I'm grinding the staff. And it's because they are if you think about it, they are the lowest staff in the Army. They are equally as, probably not as experienced, right? And so there's a lot of teaching that you have to do. And I was okay with that. And I told both, Team 1 and Team 2 field grades, like, hey, I'm the 3rd field grade. I will roll up my sleeves and do some work, right? I can crush some prods too. But at some point, the expectation, again, I had to take an appetite suppressant. And some of that, I spent a lot of time with the staff so that they understand the intent. Because at some point, to me, and what it came to, reflecting back, what could I have done better? I do wish I could have commanded more through the commanders. But I found myself drawn to the staff because I had to train them to do most of the thinking for me, at least the science behind it, so I can practice the art. Yeah. If I couldn't do one, then the other would draw me back to that, and which the staff would. And I had a great time developing, and I found that joy because company commanders have their, I think, lieutenants, and I certainly did. And I found it same satisfaction as a battalion and brigade XO, mentoring junior staff officers, helping them see the light of why their work is important. Because I do think in battalion staffs, especially in infantry staffs, those are the most left behind in most places. They're unseen professionals. If you think about it, my battalion S2 at the time right now, she's a career qualified, triple C qualified MI officer. And she comes from a known quantity. I work with her at Corps, and she is an equivalent to a company commander, right? She's ready. She's post triple C. And so she should, almost get the same amount of mentorship and development as a rifle company commander should. And I think my bias was toward the staff to making sure that they got their, and especially when, I got a lot of that when Sarah was, she just retired, but she was in the Army and she was an AG officer. She was like, a lot of the staff gets overlooked most of the time. It's like, you're right. And that, to me, I always carried with that so that they almost got the equal say, like, okay, don't forget about the staff. The staff gets overlooked, but they do most of the work. They do all the work that nobody wants to do. And, as an officer, that's where we spend most of our time. And, I just want to make sure as a commander, their work was acknowledged and they got the same development and opportunities as a company commander, which, their gift is you get to command. And my gift to you is that you get to command without me overlooking your shoulder.
Right. Mike Klepper said during his episode, he talked about during an interwar period when not everybody has deployment after deployment after deployment under their belt to develop as a leader and to learn some of these lessons. Leadership development is the decisive point during an interwar period, right?
Absolutely.
And so when you tried to lead, you're working through the staff, you're leading through these company commanders, you had pathways and you had a couple CTC rotations, to use for leader development. But how was the challenge with leader development when they didn't have the same experiences as a second lieutenant and as a first lieutenant and as a company commander twice in combat, right? That you had to kind of try to help them get up to speed or help them learn from some of those lessons from a leadership development standpoint.
Yes, sir. And that has been a challenge. How do you, again, I think we said earlier, how do you create those opportunities so that they get the similar or at least, on par leadership opportunities or training development as I got or as anybody else growing up? We do it in a war period wise, studying that. My favorite, I think, low key, unknown general officer, Fox Connor. Mm-hmm. So he did a lot of mentoring. He mentored Patton, he mentored Eisenhower, but he's not really well known in the academic community. But, what I drawn to him was because Eisenhower didn't have a war under his belt. He was in a war period where he, in between captain through lieutenant colonel, I think all the way to his regimental time, he didn't have a war under his belt. And what he did was through reading and studying. Mm-hmm. And he had opportunities, mentors to tell them what they've learned, case studies, so that you can bring that back to the force so that they are prepared for what's coming. And, they could feel it, especially during the interwar period between World War I and World War II, Treaty of Versailles. If you study history, everyone knew that a war was brewing and people were preparing, kind of like what we're doing now. And I think that's what Colonel Klepper was saying. It's how do you do that? Leadership. And you got to provide those opportunities to teach case studies. So what we've done is, brought people in for threat briefs. Pathways is a perfect venue. JPMRC, what a great venue out here to fight in the region and get trained and validated in the region, the very islands that you're going to perhaps have to fight on. The terrain, is different here than in Europe or even in CENTCOM where we mostly grew up. So, I think what I found to the point is I had to make sure that connection was made. It's your time here is not wasted. It's mm-hmm. actually, you won't even realize how much you're learning here. But you have to make that connection. And that's not just a battalion commander. I think as company commanders, field grades I relied on heavily. It's you got to try and make that A to B connection for them. It's what you're doing here matters. And here's why it matters. Here's history. And so for pathways, we did a couple of field trips to Catabatuan and out to the Manila Veterans Military Memorial or Cemetery. And there's gimlets buried there. And I was history has may not certainly repeat itself, but it does rhyme in that aspect. Here's the same place that gimlets have fought, wolfhounds have fought, right? This division has fought on the soil that we're on training on right now. And let's learn from their lesson. And it was lieutenants here, right? Medal of Honor recipients, mostly tech sergeants, corporals, lieutenants. You don't see many lieutenant colonels here. It's wars and battles are fought and won at your level. And, but what you don't want to do is waste that opportunity away. Learn as much as you can now, study the people, the book, dig into the books. And if you're not a book nerd, like most of us are, and I certainly was not, but what I got to appreciate about all the books that I'm staring at now here, and I got to, I myself dug in, is that you get to learn a lot from other people, either from mistakes or experiences that you generally don't get, right? In those wartime periods, our ancestors did, or our forefathers. So you have to learn, dig into those. I really appreciated autobiographies recently because it's from a first person view, their reflection,
what they were thinking about.
They were thinking about the time. and really got to soak in like their mistakes. And that's what I really keyed in on. And that's not because, it's like I want to critique them. It's because, and that's why I reflect a lot on like what could I have done better. Is because I think people learn better from not what good things they've done, but hey, how could I be better? And those autobiographies that I really appreciate is like, here's some things that I could have done better at the time. Here's the context of why I made it. And this is the decision I made. And I think JPMRC and Pathways provide an incredible opportunity for those self-reflective points and times to do that.
For sure. And two things. One, like autobiographies, what you're doing with me today, sharing what your thoughts, like this, someone's going to hear what you're thinking about and they're going to learn from it, So, this is huge to be able to share what you're doing. Two, setting your people up for success in those exercises in the Philippines. Like when I showed up to the Philippines to set the conditions for the rotation, for the JPMRC X rotation, it was noticeably different than the Alaska rotation and the Hawaii rotation. And I started asking people, why is it so different? Like, why do I have a totally different feeling when I look around? The way people were preparing themselves, the way people were camouflaging themselves, the way they were preparing their equipment, the way the rotational unit was preparing itself, the way the ops group was preparing themselves, the OCs, the partner forces. It was because we were in the terrain where we would be expected to do it with the Philippine counterparts. Like this was as real as it could get.
Absolutely.
The police officers, they were real police officers. They weren't role players. The army that was there from the Philippine army that were teaming up with the civil affairs that were out there, that was the folks that would actually do it in if there was a crisis in the Philippines, right? So those role players were wearing Miles gear, but they were the real people. Like they didn't have to be handed scripts. Like they were just executing what they do in real life, right? And escorting people up and down those roads, getting to know the police officer, the town mayor, the governor of the region. Like those were the real people. It was so real.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's why it felt so different for those soldiers to go through that call it a training exercise, but it was as real as a deployment could be.
Yeah, I think it was a good mentality shift to rebrand, if you will, Pathways to Operation Pathways. And it's incumbent on especially commanders at Echelon to kind of help connect that. It's like, hey, these aren't role players, right? You're seeing out there. This is for them. We were partnering with the 71st and 102nd Field Battalions. This is their area of operation. This is where they live. They go down south to fight, but this is come back. This is where they're training, but they understand the importance of Americans. And they are more historically, I think, accurate, or at least they have better appreciation of it than we did. I certainly had, because my counterpart was like, hey, he knew about the history of our battalion. He's like, hey, we know that you guys fought in Leyte. You guys are here. Americans are truly our allies. And it felt genuine that they wanted to train with us, and they were all in, right? For them, because it's closest to the promise that it could be existential. Because the reverse, and for our soldiers to feel that down to their level.
They could feel it.
I
could see it in them.
Yeah, it was, and I got that feedback. Some of them, you're going to always get the gripes, I think, here and there about why they're there. But most that I talked to soldiers, they were like, you could feel like, sir, it's the first time I've had to interact with the Philippine Army, and they were here. It was cool to see that, to train how they see their field craft. And it was also great to hear, right? What keeps me in the Army is like these stories. It was a soldier, one of my lieutenants, first time out of the country, let alone they're like, this is our first time out in a different world.
Wow.
So, you're like, man, this is great. Like you lived for those opportunities and, hear those moments, and they get to experience what better way than Operation Pathways in a country that's, in a theater is important. And then they get to train with a partner that we may have to go to war with. So you want to create those memories, I think. And that's what those memories and those experiences, they can come back, and that becomes their war story, right? It's like, hey, this is the next thing. How do I train for the Philippines? Here's the terrain. Why is jungle evacuation, like jungle school or jungle course, important? Because you got to know, if you understand how to extract a person from a gulch and that person can trust that you can do it, and that's the terrain that you have to, and you feel confident in it, then going through a gulch shouldn't be no issue. Because I know that if I go down for a heat cat, or if I break an ankle down there, God forbid, then my buddies are able to pull me, or my partners, because we did jungle school in the Philippines. Like my partners are able to do that. Right, they're able to pull a 3-point system or 2-point system and be able to pull me out in one of the most probably roughest terrain that people could fight in. Because at some point you're like, man, who wants to fight in this thing? But you have to. Like our adversary is going to absolutely exploit these terrains. So it was a good experience for them, and I'm glad the battalion and the brigade and division and JPMRC was part of that, and it was a fascinating and incredible experience, once in a lifetime.
Yeah. Hey, the last two categories, and these are for our true believers, our true listeners, because anybody that's listening at this point, of the podcast is a true believer in Pat Yoon and our tribe and what we're all about, right? Because the non-believers have given up. They gave up an hour ago. So for the true believers, they're like, man, I could listen to this for another hour or two. Right. But the last two, the last two categories are kind of like what's next and the so what. Right. And I kind of want to do what's next first. And then I want to kind of go into the so what and wrap it up in that area. Right. The what's next for you, have you already thought about, and how are you going to take what you've learned out here in the Pacific, what you've learned with the Gimlets and all your years, of leadership out here, and what you're kind of maybe even thinking about hoping to get out of the next year, right? And out of the next couple of years. And as you make this, call it a transition to becoming a senior leader in our Army, what are you thinking about right now?
Yes, sir. I was fortunate, very lucky to get selected for senior service college. So I'm going to go off and reflect a year at War College at NDU. And I think I talked to actually Colonel Pangelin, and he's an old mentor, one of the field grades of mine. He called me yesterday out of the blue, talk about like great, again, field grades. He asked him a similar question. He's like, hey, take the year to reflect. It's different from when you go from post battalion command and then you're going to go to a war college and then have to go do a joint assignment somewhere. For stability reasons, we like to stay in the DC area or NCR. If not, I go where the Army tells me, where the Joint Staff tells me. But making that transition is it's all about transition. So how are you going to now take your experience now and apply it, and who gets the benefit from that? Because the department is investing in you. So I think I'm going to do more reflection. And I've asked, there's one of the captains that I used to work with on Corps staff, Theo Lipsky, and he's asked, he's like, hey, you think you should write about your experience? And I was like, I'm not a great writer. I can probably do a podcast. Well,
everything you've just said, everything you've said over the last hour and a half is going to be transcribed into words. So
there you go.
There you go.
I think that
for free.
Thank you, sir. To reflect off that, and I think to share it. One, and I think this is the first step. So I appreciate the opportunity. And second, I do need to understand how, because I do now seeing what the Pacific is different, right? And everyone has said it, how you fight here, sustain here, the alliances and allies and partners we have here is different than what I think the military, is from European campaign or CENTCOM or AFRICOM. This place obviously has its own uniqueness, and I'm biased because most of my career I spent in the Pacific. So I think I just have to tell its story, have other people understand it. How do I do that? I start at War College with my peers, and then wherever I go, whether it be on the Joint Staff or PACOM or CENTCOM, I do think that I bring the uniqueness, and then making sure that people and the forces here are seen, and their challenges and opportunities are also shared, and that message is shared across. Because I think we carry some of that burden, especially if you're assigned in the Pacific and have served here. And that is I'll put a line in there for anybody who wants to come out. It's not just for the beaches and Mai Tai. It's also, that's a plug-in for people. If you want something unique and a challenge to serve in, then come out to the Pacific.
Yeah, and you're surrounded by phenomenal people.
Absolutely. You're talking about
from
talent.
Every branch.
Absolutely. Talk about talent out here in the Pacific. If you want to challenge yourself, not just for the Army, and if you want to challenge yourself at the 3-4-star headquarters, shameless plug for USAPAC, Indo-PACOM, and then come out here. This is the place.
That's the thing that I didn't have an appreciation for the first time I was out here, because we also had COVID. But the second time I've been out here now, and being at the Asia Pacific Center and USAPAC and seeing Indo-PACOM, is there's not just phenomenal people from the Army. There are phenomenal civilians that are working out here in this region. There are phenomenal Department of Defense folks that are working out here. There are the Navy's best are out here. The best fighter pilots, some of the best Air Force. Like those people are choosing to serve out here in this region in the Pacific, and they're here on Oahu, but throughout the region. Some phenomenal partners from Australia, from all the different countries throughout this area. I didn't have appreciation for as much as I do right now. I am surrounded by phenomenal people from every country and every branch of service.
Yeah, you talk, and I'd be remiss not to talk about that point. My next year is that, all the joint that's out here, we talk about how does the Army then fit into that. It's like, a lot of blue out here, with blue skies and blue oceans. The Army absolutely has a play in it. And, because people live on land, that was the thing. Like, armies live on land. And that's a parochial way to say it. But I do think that I have some of that burden. All of us have that burden to share that message. Like, how does the Army fit into the Pacific? And this is at the little bit of a strategic level. It's like, if it's not infantrymen, because you need the combat arms to seize terrain.
Yeah.
But really, what can you at echelon, at ASCC level? We bring the sustainment, to the joint force. We bring the engineers that the CRG may not be able to bring for the Air Force, or sustainment portion for the port securities. We can provide value at that level. And there's other MDTFs that are coming around, and the third MLR is also providing a way to provide that multi-domain fight. And I'm excited for the next year, and that's as part of the what next of how do I translate all those tactical operational elements, even strategic assets, and share that with the joint community to make sure that, our equities are either present or at least accounted for. So that I'm excited for that opportunity going forward.
Yeah. That leads into, I think the big so what here is that your influence, right? Pat Yoon's influence, right? When I told a few people, like I was doing this with you, right? Younger people like Don Castello, right? Like first sergeants, young soldiers, right? That know who you are. But then there's also senior leaders that know exactly who you are. Like I told JB Vowell, General Vowell, that I was doing this with you. I told him yesterday, and he's like, "Oh, that's going to be a good one." Right? Like these people know who you are, right?
Yes, sir.
And so you have influence from the privates all the way up to the senior leaders of our Army, right? And so those people care what you have to say. And more importantly, they care about the things that you do, right? Going forward. What's the so what? What do you hope that those people, the people that you influence on any of those kind of echelons, right? That they take away from listening to Pat Yoon, or something that Pat Yoon's just this last couple of years is kind of bringing to the top of your mind as far as this is what I want people to know and I want to share with people.
Oh man, sir, that's first I appreciate that. I don't ever think of myself in that category. Coming right off the bat, especially senior leaders and NCO and SAR majors, I do believe that our soldiers love seeing senior leaders on the ground. And if anything, going back to them, and if they're listening now to true believers, if you will, there's some importance that those presence matters. And having, even General Val coming out and having just a lunch, small MRE lunch with the battalion commanders, lieutenant colonels, and sergeant majors, I know that made impacts. But General Rudd coming out, for example, doing our Gimlet challenge, General Evans doing the Lieutenant Ho Memorial, and it's not just general officers, Sergeant Major Curry coming back to do a Gimlet challenge. Senior leader presence at whatever echelon. I think our junior officers, junior soldiers, junior leaders, they crave that, and they crave just having that connection, or at least seeing not just a photo on a wall, them actually seeing them face to face. And, hearing some of that message is fine. Some of it may be strategic. A lot of what I've heard, and just because it's just recent, you just mentioned his name, General Val, he kind of translate the big picture of what USRPAC and how it fits and what they're doing. And now, why that matters at the tactical company, platoon, squad level. and being able to articulate that. And General Evans does it well in his, division, say the division, because you got to over communicate and come back to over communicate. I would say, please continue that. Yeah. And if you can bring that down and invite people to do it. I think that's the other thing. Having worked for a general officer, that's one of the things that, there's always this, not always, but there's this hesitancy to invite people down. And that the general officer I work for is like, why? Like, hey, we want those opportunities to connect with those younger generation, create those opportunities, right? And I don't think they're going to go out of their way because they want to respect the command, especially that you have. And it's not about showcasing who you know. I do think if you couch it and put that narrative like, hey, I want you to come down because I think our soldiers would benefit from hearing what you have to say, not about the strategic platform, but just your thoughts about, your, just like you asking me to do is like your experience at that time, what you've learned. Because I think our younger generation want to know. There's this crave. Yeah. They want to see that perspective. They think they want to get that because then it helps formulate their why and their purpose and it helps them fit into that. So yeah. I think, again, sir, I appreciate this opportunity. It's not lost on me. I'm, not just to stay humble. There's a lot of people that you invited here on this podcast. And I know I step in, I'm just amongst giants here. So I feel like it's worthy of your time, especially if people listen this long. But, to me, I appreciate, one, it's a good reflection point. Two, it's a unique opportunity. It's my first podcast ever. So,
well, it doesn't seem like it.
No, it is. It's the first. And, so many people have think that I probably missed, but you provided me this, it's a unique once in a lifetime. And thank you for this. And I didn't know I wanted to do it. My wife, and that's, if anything, shameless plug again, or a shout out, throughout command, what we don't recognize, I think do enough is thank our families. Yeah. And some of your previous guests have said that. And those are the things that really, when I got to pour my heart and soul into this organization as a battalion commander. And the person who really, that effort, that energy that I didn't get to invest in was my family. Most people, you do it phenomenally well. You can, and I just can't, I wasn't that type of person. And I just haven't made that leap yet. When I invested in that organization, I did. The person that really suffered, if you will, or who didn't get my time was my family for this past 2 years. So, I got to reinvest in that this past year. That's what I'm looking forward to. But and that's just not my family. And that's every family and every formation in the Army. Thank you for supporting their loved ones and soldiers, because, they have to be seen here. They are the ones that help soldiers at home, and they're the quiet heroes, if you will, that they don't get enough recognition, in my opinion. And so I'll give my last word to them. So thank you to Sarah for, again, encouraging me to do this, because I was hesitant about doing it. She's like, no, you got to do it. And I said, okay, you're right. I got to do it because, I tribe. It matters. And now that Claire asked me to do it, so I got to do it. So thank you again, sir, for the opportunity.
Thanks for listening today. I hope we sparked some thoughts about the people that have inspired you to be who you are today. I hope you share some of your thoughts, and better yet, demonstrate them for the people in your life. Our pursuit is to get a little bit better every day. Progress equals small victories stacked on top of each other, building like compound interest. Keep stacking these positive habits. Habits like getting up early, working your butt off, learning something new, being positive, and surrounding yourself with phenomenal people. Please share your comments at the links in the show notes, and DM us at Teach Me to Fish podcast on Instagram or Facebook. Looking forward to our next conversation.
Times don't fly too high. Be sure to keep the ground in sight. Fly forever if you keep it tight. Love the world, but keep the sky under my